Good morning, good afternoon, year 5, depending on when you're watching this video. So the gang are about to do an interview, so they're planning for it now. Let's see what happens. Mum laughed and getting up said, "I'm glad you think so. Now finish that sandwich and let's get back to school. Mrs. Sanders has suggested we hold the interview in your classroom, so we need to be there in," Mum looked at her watch, "half an hour. Plenty of time for you to wash your face and look your best too. Chop chop." I gobbled down my peanut butter sandwich, gulped down my glass of milk, scrubbed my face, brushed my hair, polished my school shoes, and checking I had the greatest idea in the world with me in my backpack, got Mum to tie my school tie extra neatly. I thought I had done everything in 3 minutes, but then Mum said, "That was good for 10 minutes, which made me look at the clock and shake my head at it. As we headed back downstairs to the main door, Mum grabbed my hand and said, "We're going to have to run very fast to the bus stop, okay? Let's pretend all the journalists are zombies out to get us." I nodded and grabbed Mum's hand tightly. I tried to tell my heart to stop thumping so loudly because there weren't really any zombies around, but it wouldn't listen. As soon as Mum opened the door, I ran just as fast as I could. Pulling Mum behind me, I heard her say in a rush, "No comment," until we reached the bus stop. When we got to school and walked into our classroom, Tom and Michael and Josie were already there with their parents, and Emmett was with his foster mum and Mrs. Hemsey too. Mrs. Khan was talking to two people I'd never seen before, but Michael told us that one was a lawyer and the other one was a caseworker. "What do you think they're all talking about?" asked Josie, looking at the grown-ups standing in the corner and whispering. "Probably about that horrible MP who's saying Emmett made us go to Buckingham Palace," I said. "Really?" asked Josie. "Mum and Dad didn't tell me anything about that. They just said if I helped tell the story, we'd get some money for a proper holiday." Just then, Mrs. Sanders walked in, followed by a woman in a suit and a man with a camera. "It's them," whispered Josie loudly. "The reporters." "Everyone," said Mrs. Sanders, waving them. "Everyone," said Mrs. Sanders, waving them forward. "This is Mrs. Hall and Mr. Myers." We looked up at Mrs. Hall and Mr. Myers, who smiled and waved at us. "And this is Emmett's caseworker, Mrs. Khalid," said Mrs. Khan, pointing at the woman in the glasses standing next to Michael's mum. We all smiled. "Let's begin, shall we?" clapped Mrs. Sanders first. "Mrs. Hall is going to speak to the four of you about the greatest idea in the world, and then she's going to speak to Emmett, with Mrs. Hemsey's help, of course. And Mr. Myers will be filming you all, and then we'll take some nice pictures of the plans. Have you got them?" "Right here," said Mum, holding up my rucksack. After Mrs. Sanders and everyone had finished fussing over our hair and collars and jumpers and ties, we all sat in a row and the interview began. It only lasted 10 minutes, but it felt much, much longer. Mrs. Hall asked us what made Emmett so special and why he wanted to help him. It was hard answering more than one question at the same time, especially with so many grown-ups and a large camera staring at us. But Tom said it was because Emmett was the only boy he had ever met who had seen real bombs and guns and had been fast enough to run away from them. And Michael said everyone who had walked millions of miles to come to school deserved to be helped. And Josie and Emmett was the best footballer she had ever. And Josie said that Emmett was the best footballer she'd ever seen, even better than her, and that it wasn't fair that he didn't know where his parents were. And I said that Emmett was the bravest person I'd ever met, because even though he had run from a real-life war and found it hard to speak English and missed his family all the time, he was still the best kind of friend anyone could have. After that, Mrs. Hall asked us about the greatest idea in the world and the emergency plan. So we showed her and the camera and the drawings and talked about how we had gone to the Queen for help because we thought she could do anything. "And are you disappointed that the Queen hasn't contacted you?" said Mrs. Hall. We all nodded. "What would you say to her if you could? In fact, what would you say to everyone out there listening to you today?" asked Mrs. Hall. "That the gates need to be kept open," said Tom without hesitating. "Yeah," said Michael, "they should be kept open for everyone like Emmett, and everyone needs to help Emmett find his parents. And Josie," said Josie, "because it's not their fault they've gone missing." Mrs. Hall nodded and, looking at me, waited for an answer. So year 5, we're going to leave it there. Ooh, I'm so excited to see what happens after the interview. Over and out, Miss Davis.